One of the most crucial bilateral relationships that India has with any countries in the world is the relationship with Iran. This is a relationship that has withstood pressure for years from the West, particularly from the United States, and India has continued to maintain close ties with Tehran, even in recent months when we have seen renewed American sanctions and a very belligerent Donald Trump going after Iran with fresh American sanctions. Here on NDTV with us today is Mr. Mohammad Zarif, the Foreign Minister of Iran, who is, of course, here at a very critical time in the relationship with India. Thank you, Mr. Zarif, for joining us today. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
You are here, of course, at a time when American sanctions have kicked in on one hand. There's a lot of pressure on India. On the other hand, India is pushing back on those sanctions. How does Iran view this balancing act that India has to do with the United States on one hand and Iran on the other?
Well, we have had relations with India going back millennia. And people of the two countries know each other very well, culturally, politically, economically. We've done trade with each other for centuries. So it's very difficult for an outside power to come and intervene in these relations, particularly when what the United States is asking is not only in violation of international law, but asking others also to violate international law and Security Council resolutions. And India has adopted a principled position that it will only abide by UN sanctions, not by unilateral sanctions. There are economic pressures, as you said. The Americans are using every method of arm twisting available in the books and outside the books, and that's what they are doing illegally, unlawfully. This is not a precedent that anybody wants to see created in the future, that a country with whatever political, economic, or military might could come and order and push other countries into violating international law and into going against their own economic interests. One example is that India has been a partner with Iran for urea fertilizers that is needed by almost every Indian farmer. And unfortunately, because of the imposition of sanctions, Indian farmers today need to pay 38% more
for the fertilizer that they're using because of these sanctions.
Because of these sanctions.
How important then does the relationship with India become for Iran in the context of this pressure from the US right now, the fact that a trade arrangement with the EU and Iran also isn't really going anywhere at this point? For you, how important does this relationship become?
Well, relations with India have always been important. India is a neighbor, an important neighbor in the neighborhood. And for us, the type of relations that we've had with India are not just limited to economic affairs. We have common security concerns, common regional concerns in Afghanistan, in the Persian Gulf area. That's one of the reasons I'm here for this conference, for the dialogue, which focuses on the ongoing situation at the global scene. So we have a multitude of areas of commonality with India that we are exploring. As you said, because of American pressure, European measures that were supposed to be adopted in compliance with their obligations under JCPOA and under Security Council resolutions have not yet fully materialized. They have made verbal commitments, but unfortunately in actual terms they haven't materialized. But with other countries we have moved forward, with particularly with our traditional partners, be it our immediate neighbors, Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkey, Russia, and also with China and India and other Asian countries.
But the big question really is, how are India and Iran going to be able to do business with each other in the long run, given the US sanctions? Right now, India's got a temporary waiver, for instance, on the oil imports, but those oil imports are coming down. It's not going to be easy to sustain this. Would you agree, or is there a way you think the two countries can find a way around this?
We have been able to engage with each other even under more difficult circumstances, and I'm confident that Iran and India will find, particularly our private sector, will find possibilities to evade these illegal measures. Let's remind ourselves that these are illegal measures. We're not trying to evade law. We are trying to evade lawlessness. We are trying to evade bullying. And I'm sure Iran and India will be able, particularly our private sector, to circumvent these bullying measures.
Well, I was talking about the oil imports. Now, as I mentioned, we managed to get a waiver, a temporary waiver for now. You know that the oil imports from Iran to India have been steadily coming down. In fact, they were at, I think, their lowest in a year, just a couple of months ago. Now, you in fact said yesterday that Iran is the most reliable energy partner for India and will not allow any consideration to impede the relationship. However, as you realize, those economic sanctions have affected India's ability to import oil from Iran. So how is this going to work for us?
I can only speak on behalf of Iran. I'm sure the Indian government and Indian authorities speak on behalf of India, and they have said in the past that they will only accept UN sanctions. Now, whatever arrangements exist between India and the United States is none of our concern. It's something that the Indian government will have to engage in, and we respect the Indian government, but we know that India is committed to engaging with Iran economically. It is in the economic interest of India and the Indian people. I gave you one example of how Indian farmers are harmed because of U.S. Impositions, and I believe the Indian government is taking measures to redress that.
India has also got a temporary relief on the Chabahar port, which, as you know, is of crucial strategic importance to both countries, especially to India from the point of view of Afghanistan, etc. How are both countries placed in looking at expanding the port and other crucial projects related to the port, such as the railway project?
Well, I think the port is not just important for India and Iran, but it's important for regional security and stability, because Chabahar provides Afghanistan with a required route to international markets, and without that, poverty and illegal economy, like drug economy, warlords, human trafficking, unfortunately these are menaces that we see in Afghanistan, affecting, unfortunately, security in Afghanistan, because drugs and terrorism, human trafficking and terrorism, these are hand in hand. So Chabahar is not just important for Iran and India, but it's important for regional security. It's important for prosperity of Afghanistan, for prosperity of Central Asia, for connectivity between East and West, connectivity between North and South. These are important corridors that go through Iran, and India, as well as other countries, are interested in. And I do not think that the United States could further undermine these corridors that are, in fact, peace corridors. We have been working on a peace.
So you expect them to continue to give waivers on Chabahar?
We expect to continue to work with India on Chabahar, and Iran will continue to develop Chabahar. It is strategically important for us. We will develop it one way or the other. And the railways, the connections between Chabahar and the North-South corridor, going from Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman and Indian Ocean to as far north as St. Petersburg, and then to Eastern Europe, Northern Europe. These are important connectivity projects that nobody can impede and nobody can prevent.
Let's talk about the security situation in Afghanistan, since that is also, as you said, a very important part of your visit here. President Trump, of course, announced the U.S. intent to withdraw about 7,000 U.S. troops from Afghanistan. He's since then blown a little hot and cold on that proposal. How do you see that, though, impacting the security situation in the country?
Well, both our position of principle, as well as what we have seen, the historical evidence in our region, is U.S. presence in our region, U.S. military presence, foreign military presence in our region, has never contributed to security and stability. In fact, they have contributed to extremism and terrorism in our region. Today, United States is engaged in negotiations with the Taliban, and the most important prerequisite for Taliban to engage in the peace process is the withdrawal of U.S. forces. So we see that the presence of U.S. forces in Afghanistan for 17 years has not produced anything, and they're going back to pre-2001 situation and renegotiating with the Taliban about their presence in Afghanistan. That should put a lot of people on notice that this type of behavior by the United States in our region, be it in Syria, be it in Afghanistan, be it elsewhere in the region, has only produced instability, terrorism, and extremism.
But you would be aware that India doesn't quite see it that way, that India has a lot of concerns about how things could play out in Afghanistan if indeed the US begins to withdraw troops from there. Now, when you meet Indian leaders, how would you assuage them on that?
Well, I think India and Iran have a lot of similarities in our positions and a couple of dissimilarities in our position, and that's only natural for friendly countries not to have identical views on everything. We share the same objective in Afghanistan. We share the objective of an Afghanistan that is not certainly controlled by the Taliban, but it has an inclusive government where every segment of the society is able to interact and be part of the governance of Afghanistan. We've been in close touch with India, we've been in close touch with the government of Afghanistan, and we have recently started official dialogue with the Taliban, as most other countries have, and that dialogue is in close coordination with the government of Afghanistan, as we believe everything should be in close coordination with the government of Afghanistan. And we have briefed our Indian friends about that. We have a difference of view, as you pointed out, about the presence of foreign forces in Afghanistan, but we continue to believe, and we continue to convey this to our friends, that the presence of foreign forces in our region have never produced stability, will never produce stability.
How did the dialogue with the Taliban actually happen? I mean, how did Iran sort of get involved in this? How was the contact established?
Well, we have had unofficial intelligence contacts with the Taliban because we need to secure our border, and they occupy parts of our border areas on the Afghanistan side. So for the security of our citizens, we needed to have minimum contact with them. But then in the Moscow conference, where India and Iran both participated, we had
India unofficially,
and we had an official presence in the Moscow conference. We had a conversation with the Taliban, and then we invited them to come to Iran, and we had official contacts with them.
So how did those talks go?
Well, the talks basically were presentation of positions. The Taliban restated their position about U.S. presence in Afghanistan and the need for U.S. withdrawal before they even start talking to the government and others in Afghanistan. And we reiterated our position that we believed that there is a need for all Afghans to get together and talk to each other about the future of Afghanistan.
When you talked about the Indian and Iranian positions on Afghanistan, that both countries want an inclusive government there, India's biggest concern, though, is that any future government in Afghanistan shouldn't be one in which the Taliban has a bigger or a dominant role, or any role, actually, ideally. However, how do you see that? Do you see the Taliban now, given its influence in its resurgence, having a role in any future Afghan government?
I think it would be impossible to have a future Afghanistan without any role for the Taliban. But we also believe that Taliban should not have a dominant role in Afghanistan. Of course, at the end of the day, that's a decision that Afghans need to make. And we in the region and outside the region should facilitate Afghans making that decision, not dictate to Afghans our wishes and our desires for the future of Afghanistan. But I believe nobody in the region believes that a Taliban-dominated Afghanistan would be in the security interest of the region. I believe that's almost a consensus.
Of course, we have to talk about the other key player then in Afghanistan, which is Pakistan. How does Iran see, Pakistan's role in Afghanistan at the moment? Do you think it's doing enough as far as the peace process is concerned to actually sort of take on the Afghan Taliban? Pakistan's support to terror groups in Afghanistan is still a big concern for Afghanistan and for India.
Well, we have been in close touch with Pakistan. They have briefed us about their activities, diplomatic activities, their peace efforts in Afghanistan. We've had differences with Pakistan. We believe that Pakistani position on Afghanistan is evolving, and we believe that Pakistan now is trying to play a positive role in getting a peace process underway in Afghanistan. I understand that Pakistanis also do not wish to see an Afghanistan dominated by extremist groups, because that for Iran and India is a security threat, but for Pakistan, from our perspective, is an existential threat.
The Taliban.
Extremism in Afghanistan and Pakistan is an existential threat for Pakistan. For us, because we have a population that is not amenable to the type of message that Taliban produce and extremists produce, it's a security threat, but from our perspective, it's an existential threat to Pakistan, and I believe our friends in Pakistan recognize that. So it is necessary for all of us to work together to contribute to a peace effort in Afghanistan. And we have said to our friends here in India that we are prepared to work with them, and if they want us to play a role, we are prepared to work with them and Pakistan in order to promote an Afghan policy that is in line with our security interests, but most importantly in line with the interest of the people of Afghanistan.
Well, as you believe that Pakistan is playing a more positive role now in the peace process, as you just said. India does not see it that way. So when you talk to your Indian counterparts here, how are you going to convince them that Pakistan is changing on this?
It's not for us to convince them, it's for us to
You understand India's concerns, though.
We understand the concerns of India, we understand the concerns of Pakistan as two very close friends of Iran. We have said that our relations with Pakistan are not against India, and our relations with India are not against Pakistan. We consider these two countries as important cultural, historical, political and economic partners for Iran. Our history with these countries go back millennia. Our history with the subcontinent goes back many centuries. So for us, it's important to maintain a reasonable, frank dialogue with all our friends and neighbors, and including India and Pakistan. We understand the anxieties, the concerns of both sides, and we try, if asked and if appreciated, to play a role.
In what way? What kind of role?
In bringing these views closer.
On Afghanistan?
At least as far as Afghanistan is concerned.
Maybe there's not an equivalence in that sense. I mean, of course, I understand Iran's position on India and Pakistan, but you would acknowledge that part of the problem in Afghanistan stems from Pakistan. Its support to terror groups, the Haqqani network. This has impacted India in a very bad way, and certainly the security situation within Afghanistan has also been unstable because of that. So in a sense, is there a need to do more vis-a-vis the Pakistan front?
Well, I think Pakistanis have sensed and have felt the impact of extremism on their own security. And that has been an important wake-up call. We disagreed with Pakistan in the 90s when they created the Taliban or helped create the Taliban. We were the first to offer victims to suffer in the hands of the Taliban. 11 of my colleagues were murdered in Mazar-e-Sharif by the Taliban. But we cannot be prisoners of the past. We need to work for a better future, and Iran is ready to work with Pakistan in order to realize what Pakistani leaders have been telling us, that they believe fighting extremist groups is in their national security interest, and we believe analytically that is the case.
Do you believe, does Iran believe that India should find a way to engage with the Taliban? Now, as you mentioned, there was a Moscow meeting, an Afghan conference just recently. India, for the first time, shared a table with the Taliban, though it was in an unofficial capacity. Do you think India needs to perhaps officially engage with the Taliban for this peace process to move ahead?
Well, I've made the habit of not interfering in the internal or external
or giving advice
of other countries or give public advice. But we see that almost every country is now engaging with them, and that is why we have decided to officially engage with them. But the decision that India needs to make is a decision that India needs to make, not us.
So you're not going to reveal your advice?
No, I think India is a mature country and they can act on their own self-interest.
Finally, Mr. Zarif, you've been very very publicly taking on the US president in the last year or so. Looking ahead at 2019, right at the beginning of the year, how do you see Donald Trump's foreign policy playing out?
I don't know whether there is a foreign policy. So I have to see one to judge.
All right, well, very, very well put. Mr. Zarif, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV today. Thank you.
Good to be with you.